Hello, listeners. My name is Adeniyi Comfort Olawumi, your course facilitator for Introduction to Teaching Profession EDU712. Today, we shall be considering the topic, categories of learning objective in teaching and learning process. That is categories of objective in teaching and learning process. At the end of this lesson, you should be able to differentiate between the general and specific objectives. 2, identify the characteristics of a well-stated behavioral objective. 3, discuss the domain of educational objectives. 4, state the importance and purpose of objective in teaching and learning process. Before we move on, now let's consider what an objective is. An objective is a statement which describes the expected outcome of an instruction. That is a statement put down to describe what the teacher wants to achieve at the end of teaching or at the end of a particular program. Let's take into consideration that let's liken an objective to an agenda of a meeting. If somebody wants to organize a meeting, definitely such a person will draw an agenda of what he or she wants to achieve at the end of the meeting. So we can liken agenda of a meeting to learning objective. As we all know, any meeting without an agenda will not achieve much, because such meeting will not be well organized and it will not be focused. So also any teaching and learning process without an objective will not have any focus. And at the end of the day, it will have no basis of or yardstick of judging whether such teaching process or learning process is successful or not. Usually we can categorize objective into 2 broad terms or 2 main terms. Like we can say we have the general objectives and the specific objectives. What are general objectives? General objectives can be likened to the goal of education. That is, general objective of education can be likened to the goal of education, the goal of setting up a program. For example, we can say the goal of setting up national certificate in education, goal of setting up teacher education program in the university, that is the BSc Ed programs in the university. For instance, the goal of NCE, that is National Certificate in Education, is to produce teachers who will be able to teach at a primary school level. While the goal of teacher education in the university, of course, is to produce teachers that will teach at secondary school level. So these are broad objectives. They are more broad and they take longer time to be achieved. Let's now talk about the specific objectives. The specific objectives are teachers' objectives. That is the objective that teachers set before going into the classroom to measure whether he or she has really achieved what he has got to the classroom to do or not. This is usually more short or is less broad compared to the general objectives. It's usually used to guide the teaching and learning process in the classroom. It is a short time objectives. Before we go on again, we want to talk about this particular objective, especially the behavioral objective or the specific objective. I want us to know that the specific objective is usually referred to as behavioral objectives or performance objectives. This objective is common. This is what the teacher uses day in, day out. And now let's talk about the characteristics of this particular type of objective, that is the specific objectives. The characteristics include the objective, a well-stated behavioral objective must have the behavior, it must contain the degree, must contain the audience, and it must be relevant. What do I mean by the behavior? That is, what behavior does the teacher expect the student to be able to exhibit at the end of an instruction? For instance, we can say at the end of the lesson, the student should be able to define, list, describe, solve, jump, draw, and so on and so forth. All this type of behavior, all this type of expectation, that is changes in behavior that we expect the student to do at the end of the day, is one of the key things that must be involved when we state behavioral objective or performance objectives. And I must say clearly, when we are talking about the behavior here, that behavior must be something that can be obvious. It is something that somebody can see. It must be a kind of measurable terms. Like, for example, if you are defining something, I will know that you are defining it. If you are singing, I will know that you are singing. If you are dancing, I can easily see it. If you are solving a problem, if you are drawing a diagram, and so on and so forth, it's something that can be measured. But it is different from using something that is not measurable, like understand, like know. All those ones are the kind of objective that cannot be used in performance objective. The second characteristic of a well-stated behavioral objective is the degree. At what degree do we want the student to perform this particular behavior? That is, there must be a set level, a set degree that we want the student to be able to perform the behavior. For instance, you can say at the end of the lesson, the student should be able to solve 4 out of 5 questions on quadratic equation. The student should be able to list all the alphabets, or we can say the student should be able to draw and label the diagram of a fish correctly. That the student should be able to, to perform a particular behavior with a kind of, level. For instance, in the example I stated earlier, 4 out of 5 is a degree. Labeling all the alphabet, that is, if the student is unable to label all, that means the degree has not been achieved. The student should be able to draw and label the diagram of a fish correctly is also a degree. They should be able to draw and list the diagram correctly. So all this one, a degree is also a very good or a very essential characteristic of a well-stated behavioral objective. Then the third one that must be contained in the behavioral objective or performance objective is the audience. Who are the people that we expect to carry out this particular behavior we are talking about? Of course, in this case, they are the students, that is the students. But if, for example, we are organizing a kind of a seminar or workshop, we can say at the end of the workshop or the teaching at the workshop, the participants should be able to. But in the classroom setting, it's of course the learner or the student. So the audience here can be referred to as the learner or the student. Then the last one, or the last characteristic here, is the relevance. That is, the objective must be relevant to the age of the student, to the content we're about to teach, and to the background of the student. For example, you cannot be setting objective for quadratic equation, and you now be setting questions on linear equation. If the objective is meant, if the content you are to teach is a quadratic equation, then the objective should also be based on that. The objective must be relevant, especially to the content you are teaching or about to teach. Before we go on, now let's talk about this behavioral objective also, or this objective in another dimension. I want to tell you that objective must also cover all the domains of education. We have 3 domains in education: the cognitive domain, that is domain of objective. We have the cognitive domain, the affective, and the psychomotor domain. That is, objective must cover these 3 domains. What do I mean by cognitive domain? The cognitive domain or the cognitive objective tests those aspects of learning that has to do with cognition, reasoning, intellect, and so on and so forth. Now, examples of objective at that level include: students should be able to list, they should be able to enumerate, they should be able to define, they should be able to explain, they should be able to compare and contrast. All these ones you have to think before you are able to do what? To do them. They have to do with cognition. So example at that domain, like I said list, enumerate, describe, define, compare and contrast, explain, and so on and so forth. So, but I also want to mention here again that even cognitive level or the cognitive objective has a kind of level. We have the lower level cognition and the higher level cognition, though that's not the topic for today. Like for instance, when I say a student should be able to define, Defining is more easier, or listing is more easier than for you to say somebody should explain or that somebody should compare and contrast. For you to be able to compare and contrast something, you must have higher knowledge of that particular content before you can compare and contrast, or before you can explain. But to list or to enumerate is easier, is of lower level cognition. So we shall be discussing that in a later day. Now, another level of objective that we have, or another type, is the affective objective, or the affective domain. We are talking about affective domain that has to do with somebody's feeling, the way somebody perceives something. It has to do more about somebody's emotion, the way you see things. So there are some objectives that can also be tested at this level. The objective include the student should be able to appreciate, they should be able to comment, they should be able to, they should be able to appreciate, they should be able to comment, they should be able to justify. When you are appreciating something, the way I will appreciate it will be different from the way you will appreciate it. If you are commending something, our perception about it can also be different. I want to mention here that some students can be good at the affective domain, and they may not be good at the cognitive domain. And that's why it's good for teachers to test all the 3 levels of objectives, so that to be able to attend to different type of students that we have in the class. In the class, we have heterogeneous students in terms of their background, their knowledge, their ability, and so on and so forth. So we should give opportunity for all learners to express their ability by testing these 3 domains of education. And lastly, we have the psychomotor domain. The psychomotor domain usually tests the physical ability, these physical skills, the physical skills of the student. In this type of domain, we test objectives such as the student should be able to draw, they should be able to jump, they should be able to dance, they should be able to demonstrate, they should be able to, perform. This kind of objective is usually used in practical classes, especially it's more useful to people that are doing something like physical and health education, the PhD students. They can be used, and even people in the practical labs. So they should be able to, type. When you are typing too, that is also part of psychomotor activities. So these are the domains of education. But it's unfortunate today that teachers, in most cases, they remain at the cognitive level, which is not good enough. As a very good teacher, or as an efficient teacher, a teacher should be able to, test all these domains of education, so as to give opportunity for us to test our students in all dimensions or all areas. Now, before we go on, now let's talk about what are the guidelines for selecting these teaching objectives. We have talked about the importance of the characteristics of these objectives, but now, what are the guidelines for us to select teaching objectives? In selecting teaching objectives, you must indicate learning outcomes that are appropriate to the instructional areas. That is, when we are testing objectives, it must be adequate, it must be in line with the instructional areas. Like I said earlier, you can't be setting objective for quadratic equation while you are teaching linear equation. You can't be setting objective for chemistry while you are teaching biology. The objective must be in line with the instructional area. Also, objective must cover all the domain of education. We just finished talking about domain of education now. That is, you must not remain at the cognitive level alone. Neither must it be only affective, neither should it be only psychomotor. A good teacher should be able to test all the 3 domains of education. That is, the objective must cover this domain to give opportunity for us to test, the different type of students that we have in the classroom. Like I said students are different in all, in all ramifications. Some are good in the cognitive aspect, while some are very good in the psychomotor aspect. But if you stop at the cognitive level, it doesn't mean that you'll be cheating or you'll be shortchanging those ones that are in the, the psychomotor level or affective level. So objective must also be attainable by those particular students that the objective is meant for. That is, the objective must not be too difficult for them to comprehend. Neither must it be too easy. If it is too difficult, the student will not be able to do what? They will not be able to achieve it. The objective will not be achievable. But if it is too simple too, the students will not really concentrate in the classroom if those things that are in your objective, if they are the things that they already know, or most of the students in the class already, they know what you are to teach or what are your objectives, they will not concentrate and they will not be serious with the study. So it must be in line, or it must be appropriate for their age, for their background, for their experience, and so on and so forth. Also, objective must be in line with the philosophy of the school in which the instruction is to be given. That is to say, if you are setting objective, you need to know the purpose of those students being in school. If, for instance, if it is a student that is, preparing for a particular exam, those objectives must be in line with what is required of the students in those to pass such exams. Objective that we are going to set for a student that is in teacher education must also be in line, with what will prepare him or her to become what he or she has gone to the school to do. The kind of objective that will be given to somebody that is reading a kind of BSc program is quite different from what you give somebody that is supposed to be a teacher, a teacher in training, that is somebody that will teach at the end of the day. What I'm saying in essence is that it must be in line with the philosophy of the school in which the instruction is to be given. And lastly, objective must be in line or in harmony with basic principles of learning. What do we mean by this? We mean that objective must be set in a way that it will be well organized, starting from the simplest to the complex. It must be something that is organized. You don't just set objective anyhow. It must be well organized so as to be able to comprehend it well. Now we'll be talking of objectives since. Why are we talking about objectives? What are the purpose of learning objective? Why is it important? One, learning objective guide teaching. When a teacher knows what he or she is expecting the student to do at the end of the lesson, then the lesson will be somehow focused. It will guide the teacher on what to present to the student, since he knows what he wants them to do at the end of the lesson. Then two, selection of desirable learning experience. That is, it helps us to select learning experiences that are, that will make us to achieve the set objectives. That is, when you have the objective on ground, the learning experiences that will make somebody to achieve that objective will be easy for teachers to do what? To select it. It will be easy for the teachers to select it. And number three, objective provide motivation for teaching and learning. It helps the teachers it motivates the teacher and also motivates the student. The student know what the teacher is expecting them to do. That is, he knows the outcome that the teacher is expecting. So the student can, be focused because they know what is expected of them at the end of the day. The teacher also will want to cover, those objectives he has set for himself or set to achieve at the end of the lesson. And also, objective facilitate evaluation and test construction. If you already have an objective to set, to evaluate the lesson becomes very easy. Since already you know what you want the student to do at the end of the lesson, or at the end of the day, those objectives will guide, the test construction. It also guides the way students is being evaluated. Then lastly here, because objectives make teaching and learning, teaching learner center. Makes it learner center in the sense that students from the beginning knows what is expected of them, or even before the lessons of the objectives are set. So students can even read ahead of the teacher. It makes the learner to be more responsible for his or her learning. And let's say, for instance, maybe the objectives are set, and at the end of the lesson, the student cannot really get what has been taught. He or she can go back, visit the objective and do a kind of self-study to be able to, achieve those things that are already stated in the objective. Now, in this particular lesson, we've learned a lot. We've learned about the guideline for selecting learning objective, purpose of learning objective, characteristics of well-stated behavioral objectives. Now, let's just conclude the lesson by saying in this particular lesson, we've been able to, one, see that objective is an integral part of teaching and learning process, that it is very, very important in teaching and learning process. Two, the objective gives direction on what to teach and also assist the teacher on how to evaluate. It gives direction on what to teach because already you have set those things that you want to achieve at the end of the lesson. And so evaluation, like we said earlier, becomes very, very easy. The session also deals with characteristics of a well-stated behavioral objective. You will remember at the beginning of this lesson, we said a well-stated behavioral objective has some characteristics, which include one, the behavior, that who is to carry out the objective and will list such behavior. Many of them like perform, draw, list, evaluate, solve, jump, describe, compare and contrast, enumerate, justify, and so on and so forth. All these ones are what? They are the behavior. We're talking about the degree that the teacher has to set a kind of limit or a kind of, steps or level he wants the student to be able to achieve that particular behavior. At what level does he want them to achieve it? And we said it can be stated in different form. You can say 4 out of 5, 70%, correctly. You can say list all the alphabet, list all the elements in of chemistry, all the elements or whatever. You can just, give a kind of degree of performance that you want the student to be able to attain. After the degree, we said the audience in this case must also be mentioned, which is students or which are the students or the learner in the teaching and learning process. And if it's in other places that you are doing the teaching, it depends on the people that are in that category. I said if it is in a workshop, it can be the participant and so on and so forth. So, and lastly, we said it must also be relevant. Relevancy or being relevant is very, very important in the sense that the objective must be in line with what you are teaching. It must not go outside what is to be taught. Then, after talking about we said this session also covers categories of learning objectives. We have 2 broad types, like I said earlier, that one, we have general objectives, which is likened to the goal of education or the goal of setting up a program. While we have the specific objective, like I said, these are teacher objective, that is objective that teacher sets to guide himself in the classroom. Now, for you to know whether you have really learned in this lesson or not, you can assess how well you have learned by asking the following question, or by assessing yourself with the following question. 1, state 3 purposes of behavioral objectives. 2, identify and explain the 3 characteristics and the 3 classifications of educational objectives. I take it again. State 3 purposes of behavioral objective. 2, identify and explain the 3 classifications of educational objectives. Thanks for listening, and God bless you. Thank you.